Allegiance. We have the reading of the AUSD mission and vision statement.
The mission of the Albany Unified School District is to provide excellent public education that empowers all to achieve their fullest potential as productive citizens. AUSD is committed to creating comprehensive learning opportunities in a safe, supportive, and collaborative environment, addressing the individual needs of each student.
Thank you. We now need to approve the agenda. Does anyone want any changes to the agenda? Seeing none, do we have a motion?
I make a motion.
Go ahead, I'll second.
I make a motion to approve the agenda.
I'll second that.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Okay, tonight we have a school spotlight on Albany High School.
Thank you, President Black, trustees. And actually, in lieu of doing the Safe Schools update, I'm actually added time on for the Albany High School to do their spotlight because they have a lot to present. And so with that, I'm going to turn it over to Principal Alexia Ritchie and her students. Ms. Ritchie.
All right, thank you for having us. We actually expected a few more people, so I'm not quite sure if they'll be coming in a little bit later, but we were just trying to figure out the timing for this so we can certainly get started, and if it's the board's pleasure when the other students come in, we could certainly continue on with that. But what I wanted to do tonight was to spotlight some of the student groups that have been formed at Albany High School, student initiatives and student-led groups that perhaps have sprouted from different events of last spring, but also I wanted to point out and start with our first group, SEAC. I don't have a representative here yet. SEAC stands for the Students for Equitable Advisory Council, and that was a group started by Superintendent Williams a few years ago to give voice and equity to students who aren't traditionally represented in the governing bodies at Albany High School. And so that group has been around for a number of years. Some of their accomplishments include providing the venue for the Town Hall 2.0, which some of you attended at Albany High School this year. And they are also part of the public service announcement that our consultant, Dr. Garcia, will be creating with a number of student groups. I also wanted to profile and showcase two more student groups that are formed at Albany High School. One of them is Speak, and we have Anna Baker-Haynes as well as board member Naveen representing Speak. And if you'd like to join us, they're going to be giving you a little background, their purpose, their accomplishments, and then their next steps. Anna Baker-Haynes.
Hi, I'm Anna Baker-Haynes. I'm a senior at Albany High School. Thank you for having us tonight. Okay, so as Ms. Ritchie said, we are a student-started, student-led program that started after the Instagram account last year. We started by just getting together and talking about what we wanted to see change in Albany. And our biggest thing was that there's kind of a lack of social-emotional learning, we feel like, and a lack of empathy. And we decided a great way to target that is to talk to fifth graders. And we ended up developing a curriculum that talks about racism, discrimination, and how empathy can help to get rid of that. So last year we did about 11 presentations in fifth grade classrooms to test it out. And they went pretty well. And from what we learned from that, we developed a new set of 4 curricula which also talk about racism and discrimination, but broken down into 4 subcategories, which are the history of racism, where we show a timeline and we start with the first slave that comes to the United States, and we end with the racist Instagram at Albany High School. And then we talk about how history contributes to where we are now and how we can help make it better within our community. The next one is a conversation on privilege, which we will be starting next week, actually. And then we have one that is about global citizenship, because a lot of fifth graders have just gotten social media or phones and are going into middle school where it's a lot more present. And then we end with one where we ask them to design an idea where they could make a change within their school. And then we'll present those ideas to their principals, and hopefully one or two of them will get taken on in the next year. So far we've done our first presentation. We have one per quarter. We've seen every single fifth grade classroom, and we're scheduled to start our next set. One thing that I think Speak is really important for is, like I said, targeting empathy and social emotional learning. I think it's a great way for students to really connect to one another, and that's really our goal, is to have students look out for one another and target issues when they're just small things that occur day to day. So hopefully it prevents bigger issues from happening again. So going forward, our plan is to do this set of 4. We'd like to expand to the middle school next year, and we would love to see Speak become a mandatory part of fifth grade curriculum. But our big thing in doing that is that we would love for high school students to continue to teach it and present it. And that way we're connecting our high school students to our elementary school students, we're getting our district to know each other better, and that way fifth graders are learning, sixth graders are learning, and high schoolers are still learning. Yeah, that's all I have to say. You want to add, Navin? Okay, Navin's going to add to that.
Thank you. So yeah, just to really kind of snowball off what Anna said, one of the things that makes Speak very effective is the fact that it's led by high schoolers. And what that does is it brings in role models where, typical kind of programs like this are run with adults that kids, encounter a lot. But when we bring in high schoolers into the equation, they have someone they can also relate to and respect. And they look up to us, which is a really amazing opportunity, because as much as they learn, about the different things we're teaching about, we also learn so much from them. What's going on, on the playgrounds, what's going on at, the schools. And that gives us a better idea of what struggles they're facing and what we can do to better that situation. I think Speak is definitely very positive for us. It connects a lot of us as high schoolers and a lot of the elementary schoolers. And we've gone back to classrooms and seen students that we've seen last year, and they still remember the curriculum that we taught last year, and they seem to be getting it very well. Also, the thing that's great about the fifth graders is they're very honest, and that provides this really honest dialogue between us where we can, they say, hey, we have this problem, and we're like, hey, we're here to give you the tools. And I think that groups like Speak and Stand work very well in terms of teaching our younger students how to have empathy for each other, how to combat issues such as racism, sexism, and the rest of the isms, while also providing a growing and fostering opportunity and relationships between our younger and older peers. Thank you.
So in addition to SEAC and Speak, we also have one more student group we'd like to profile tonight, which is STAND. And I'm not seeing a representative yet from STAND, but I can give you a little background. Again, it was formed from the, oh good, we do have STAND. Oh good, I'll let her speak for herself. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Jessica Shen-Wachter. I am a junior, and I don't have a lot prepared, so I apologize in advance if this is a little all over the place. I'm here with Stella and Isabel, who are also members of STAND. And basically, as you guys know, last year, I think we talked about this last year at a previous board meeting. One of our major accomplishments was that last year we were able to go into high school classes, and we were able to do discussions on the nature of systemic oppression. We focused specifically on sexism and anti-Black racism, as those were two of the most pertinent forms of oppression that the Instagram account dealt with. So in addition to reaching around 900 students, we were also able to do the training with around 40 teachers and administrators. And so our goal in this was just to create a better understanding of these issues and the impact that they have, and the impact that incidents like the Instagram account, for example, has, and how damaging they can be. And so earlier this year, we ran a poster campaign which focused on definitions of pertinent language regarding social justice and systemic oppression. And so some of the words we used, or some of the words that we focused on, included intersectionality, anti-Semitism, and discrimination. For example, how discrimination differs from oppression. And then later last year, we hosted an immigrants' right rally, and this was in response to the original threatening of DACA and then having DACA later be repealed. And so we thought that that was a really important issue that everyone be aware of, and so we had that rally to focus the conversation on immigrants and immigrant voices in our community. And so we had several speakers from our community who are immigrants or whose family have immigrated to this country, and they were able to share their stories, which we think is really important. And then finally, something that we are planning on doing in this upcoming year, right now we're planning on, and we're currently in the process of writing a curriculum for parents. And so this curriculum is basically for a series of presentations we're planning on doing to educate parents and other adult community members, first of all, on the nature of systemic oppression and how that relates to their kids. And so we think it's really important that parents are able to talk to their kids about various forms of oppression or privilege that their kids might deal with, and the ways that that might affect them and the responsibilities that they have because of that. And so we hope to start rolling those out in March. We don't have all the logistics completed yet, but we are in contact with members of the steering committee on the ACT. And then in general, Stan's goal is just to make systemic change within our community. We really want to focus on education and changing the culture, because we think that if the change is not systemic, it's not going to be lasting, and we want to make a lasting change. So thank you.
Thank you. So again, to summarize, we really wanted to spotlight the synergy that's coming from the high school students. To quote our last speaker, to make that systemic change within the high school student body with STAND, within the entire elementary population with SPEAK, and again, within those groups of students who traditionally aren't represented in the mainstream governing body with SEAC. So thank you. Any questions?
What does stand for?
What does STAND stand for? What's the acronym standing for?
The acronym is Students Together Advocating Now for Demarginalization, although we just liked the word.
Good. And was SPEAK an acronym for something?
No, it's not.
Speak Up. There you go. Good. That's what it stands for.
Any questions or comments? Charlie?
Well, first I wanted to thank everybody who came and spoke to us. It's very nice to hear what you're doing. And I have, I think, a question for each of our student groups. I really like the idea of going into the fifth grades and working with the fifth grades. I think that's a wonderful idea. I'm curious about whether you get many questions from fifth graders and what kinds of questions you might be getting from them.
We get lots of questions. So starting with the curriculum that we're on now with history, so we have this timeline that's full of events. So a lot of our questions are, oh, well, we learned about that, so like how does that tie to the next event? Or, well, that's really horrible. Didn't they know that's horrible? Like, why did they do that? But that's a great question, because then we talk about why do racist events happen? Like, why did that happen at the school? And we get into like the core of why these issues actually occur, which I think creates a really awesome dialogue and conversation. I'm trying to think about other questions that we've gotten. Those tend to be like the majority of what we've gotten. We actually just had a conversation in our group of high school students yesterday about what questions we thought were going to come up when we talk about privilege. and how we wanted to handle certain questions with certain statistics we're talking about and what's appropriate to answer and issues like that. I don't know if Navin has anything he wants to add.
Sure. So from like Anna said, a lot of our questions kind of reflect the curriculum that we'll be discussing. So if we're talking about race, a lot of things will, they'll have a lot of questions about different events and history and stuff. And we have a timeline that's very full of like different events in history, whether it be, when slavery legally started and ended, when the civil rights were, things like that, and just more things that can kind of like tie them into like the grand scheme of things. So they have different like place markers that they've already learned about, and they can tie in these other events between them. So like Anna was saying, a lot of them kind of reflect the curriculum that we discuss. And then we also get a lot of questions that pertain to themselves. So they'll be like, my friend, was, if we're talking about like prejudice and discrimination, they'll be like, my friend wasn't allowed to play basketball because she's a girl. Is that an example of discrimination? And we'll be like, yeah, well, yes, that is. Like, this is an example of sexism, and, here's what you can do to, stop it. And we try to encourage kids to really talk things out and really try to make proactive steps. So we'll say, hey, next time you see someone on the playground and they say, you can't play with me because you're a girl, just say, hey, you can come play with us. And, like a lot of questions will either pertain to the curriculum that we discuss or questions that the kids have about their own experiences, and hopefully we can better answer that and try to give them more clarity on their situation, because a lot of information, in terms of that, like they might not feel comfortable talking to a teacher about, but whereas we have that high school and, elementary schooler bond, they feel more comfortable talking to us about their experiences.
Did that answer your question? Okay.
Others?
And I'd love to ask those who have been active in STAND if you have any thoughts to share about what would success look like to you.
You need to come up to the mic, please.
That was a tough question, I know.
So we've had conversations like this before. It's a pretty hard thing to hone into specifically, but at least for me, something that I think is really important and something I'd like to see change is to see students actively be having these conversations about racism, sexism, homophobia, ableism, like all kinds of oppression, and how we are all affected by them, oppression and privilege. And I'd also like to see that become more integrated into the curriculum than it is currently, because I think those are really important conversations to have.
Great. Thank you for sharing that.
Others? Russ?
I'll note again, and this year it falls on a weekday. California Ed Code does define March 5th as Black American Day. It's in honor of or commemorating the death of Crispus Attucks in the Boston Massacre, and directs that the school shall celebrate with appropriate commemorative exercises that holiday. So if folks want to arrange something, March 5th is Black American Day under California Ed Code.
Thanks. Have other questions or comments for the kids?
Thank you for speaking. I'm really glad to hear from both of you, and the programs and your efforts seem very complimentary. Thank you.
Yes, thanks for all the work you're doing. It's going to make a difference, and it's important that it get done. Thank you. Okay, that brings us to the consent calendar. Anybody have any items on the consent calendar they want to ask questions about or pull for separate vote? Kim?
I just want to comment on one item on the donations report.
All right.
I just want to point out on the donations report, which is November of last year, we saw a donation from School Care of $274,000, well over $250,000. And I just want all of the people who donated to School Care and for the School Care workers themselves to know how appreciated that is. without that money, education in Albany would be really bare bones. And I also wanted to highlight Albany Education Foundation in the month of November contributed $16,000 for a great variety of field trips. When you look at all the field trips that they support, that really adds the zing to the education program, and it's deeply appreciated.
Thanks, Kim. Anyone else? Anyone in the audience want to comment on the consent calendar? Can we have a motion on the consent calendar?
So I move we approve the consent calendar.
I second.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Great. We have an appointment to the City of Albany Community Media Access Committee.
Thank you, President Black. The purpose of this item is to approve the appointment of Raquel Ramirez to serve on the City of Albany's Community Media Access Committee as a student member. And the City of Albany Community Media Access Committee advises the city on changes to the cable TV access policy as well as the operations for KALB, their video productions, training opportunities. And so we have, the board appoints 2 members, 1 adult and 1 student. And so this is a recommendation to appoint Raquel Ramirez as a student appointee. And in your package, she did give some background information and her statement of interest.
Thanks. Any comments or questions?
I want to give a personal push for this. I really think that Raquel is an incredible person. She's a strong leader. And actually, it's written in her essay, but she is a part of the youth board for KQED. So she has a lot of experience with media management and youth advocacy. So I really support this decision, yeah.
Thanks, Mahima. Ross?
I would note that my daughter Chloe was actually appointed by Rochelle Nason as Vice Mayor now, Nason's appointment to the board. Chloe's involved in the Global Youth Advisory Council for the Representation Project. I think they're sitting next to each other in Spanish. So I think there will be ready access to that committee with the thoughts of the board.
Perfect. Anyone else? Anyone in the audience? Okay, so we need a motion to appoint.
I so motion.
Second?
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Perfect. Board and superintendent report.
Thank you, President Black. I'm actually going to share part of my report with Trustee Kim Trutane on a matter that is important in terms of adequacy of funding for California. So please bear with me. I want to give some facts here. California is the 6th largest economy in the world, and California has experienced decades of underfunding in K-12 public schools. We rank about 41st in the nation for per pupil spending and 51st in the nation on student-teacher ratio and for the number of librarians and counselors per student. California spends 2.7% of taxable income on schools, while the national average is 3.3%. We have seen an increased mandates on K-12 education to districts to contribute to the state's unfunded liability for PERS and STIRS, and that's the retirement system for public employees and teachers. Legislative advocacy and collective action are needed to heighten public awareness to these problems. Now, Albany belongs to the California School Funding Coalition, which is working to coordinate advocacy to build an aspirational local control funding target that will fund California schools commensurate with the top 10 states in the nation. We believe is a goal befitting the world's 6th largest economy. In August of 2013, the AUSD board passed a resolution to support commercial property tax reform that would require non-residential commercial properties to be reassessed regularly while maintaining residential property owners' protections under Prop 13. And I would like to publicly and strongly advocate for our legislators and voters to consider a new education funding model that will increase the base local control funding formula to adequately provide funds for our students. And actually, I'd like to turn the rest of this over to Trustee Trutane.
I don't have much to add to that, except to say that if you want to learn more about this and see some of the figures, I believe there's material at the back of the room. The California Budget Center has a document, California's support for K through 12 education is improving, but still lags the nation. I think that it's important to realize that I don't think that that's a well-known fact. I think that parents in California feel like we're probably about average, and we're not. We're seriously below average, and it's going to take the voter base, it's going to take the entire state to pull together to try to make a change. And I think another document that's in the back is the California School Funding Coalition that Superintendent Williams mentioned. And what this news release says is that Assemblymember Muratsuchi has vowed to introduce legislation to the Assembly during this session to try to make some of these changes. So I hope that we can create a group of active people in Albany, people who are willing to work toward this, to get the word out and to support these goals. Thank you.
Thanks. Anyone else? Jacob.
Yeah, I just wanted to add something on a similar note. I'm sure you guys might have gotten the email too from CSBA about a resolution that they're recommending. I got it. It's very similar to what you guys were talking about, and they're asking for California schools to be funded by 2020 at the national average and by 2025 in the top 10 of the states. So it was sent to me on
Good point.
yesterday, and I think there was a couple of them sent, so maybe we can talk about working on a draft resolution. They kind of gave us a skeleton one that we can maybe look at.
Great suggestion.
Yes, actually, so I spoke with a person from the California School Funding Coalition who's working with CSBA, that when this bill gets written, and it's being co-written, that when that bill gets authored, that would be a great time for us as a school board and school district to put together a resolution. So they'll be sending us a sample resolution. And as soon as that comes, I will be asking the agenda committee to agendize it.
Thank you.
Great, thanks. Anyone else? Ross?
Yeah, just something prompted by something I saw in the news. As you all may know, there's a lot of upheaval going on right now in Iran, and part of the response from the Iranian government is to talk about banning English in the elementary schools. And that got me thinking on the idea that we don't start world language education till secondary as it is, and I suspect there might be a handful of schools in the whole country that might teach Farsi. And it just reminded me that an issue that of interest, concern is that we start language so late, or that we don't pursue various alternative ways to try to encourage students into world languages, whether or not it's part of our formal, whether or not Spanish, say, was taught at second grade. I spent a fair amount of time over the break using Duolingo to teach myself some rudimentary Gaelic, which was a struggle. But if somebody in his 50s is struggling, a kid who's 5 is going to take to some of these languages like a duck to water. And I really think we ought to look down the road at how we handle foreign language instruction in a very global age.
Thanks, Ross. Anyone else? Okay. Student board member report.
In December, the Albany High School Choir celebrated their 10-year anniversary and a final round of Magical Delights. With an epic 4-course meal, 3-act play, and music all around, it was a night to remember.
December 15th, the Ocean View Sing-Along took place in the multipurpose room. With holiday tunes and singing galore, the holiday spirit was strong. Actually, on December 15th, I also had the opportunity to go to the Reach Youth Center in Oakland, and it was part of a youth empowerment in Alameda County conference, and I just wanted to report back because Superintendent Williams and I had talked about this. But basically during the conference, we talked about making the arts accessible to school districts all across California, and especially in our district, how we can make that a priority.
The AUSD's Black Parent Engagement Committee hosted a Dine and Donate on January 4th at Farmburger. It was a great night to come together as a community.
The Brunch de Reyes took place on January 6th in the Cornell Multipurpose Room. It was fun for all.
Last night, AUSD implemented the Speak Up, Be Safe curriculum created by the Child Help organization. Child Help's Speak Up and Be Safe is a research-based child abuse and bullying prevention curriculum equipping students nationwide with the skills they need to play a significant role in the prevention or interruption of abuse and bullying. In the coming weeks, all AUSD elementary students in grades 1 through 5 will be receiving their grades levels Speak Up, Be Safe two-part lesson series.
There will be no school on Monday, January 15th, in observance of Martin Luther King Jr. Day.
On Wednesday, January 17th from 7 to 8:30 p.m., there will be a parent education night at Marin. Professor Rodolfo Mendoza Denton discusses the question, how can we come together to talk to children about discrimination and inequality? This event is presented to you by the Ocean View, Cornell, and Marin PTAs.
The Albany Music Fund will be having a meeting on January 20th at 9:30 in the morning in the Albany High School Choir Room. Join us to discuss music and the arts in Albany Unified School District.
The Books Incorporated Book Fair will be at Cornell from January 22nd through January 26th. Come on down for books and fun. And that concludes the Student Board Report.
Thank you. Any questions for the students? Thank you for the report. Persons to address the board on matters not on the agenda. Oh, seeing none. We have a review and discussion of secondary school accountability report cards.
Thank you, President Black. The purpose of this item is for the board to review and discuss the school accountability report card for Albany Middle School, Albany High School, and McGregor High School. I'm going to turn this over to our Director of Curriculum Instruction Assessment, Marie Williams.
Thank you. Good evening, Superintendent Williams, Board President Black, board members, and community. At our last board meeting, we presented the elementary SARCs, which were approved this evening. Tonight, we bring before you the 3 secondary school accountability report cards. I don't have a formal presentation to accompany them. The reports speak for themselves. There were a couple of questions that I thought might be worth kind of sharing the information with the group. One of the questions was having to do with per pupil funding and how that is calculated. And in particular, there was a question about why the per pupil funding amount was so large for McGregor High School in relation to the other schools. And so that is because the total staffing allocated to every school, including faculty, staff, and administration, is totaled and divided by the number of students. And at McGregor High School, while there are about 28 students right now that are accessing McGregor, not all of them have their primary enrollment as McGregor High School. And so the totals of dollars allocated are divided just by the number of students that have their primary enrollment at McGregor. So that's, so it makes it look like we're spending a lot more money at McGregor. And so I just wanted to explain to the audience that's how that per pupil expenditure is calculated. And I know that that's a question that's come up before, so thought that that would bear explaining here. And then there was another question relating to both McGregor and Albany High, having to do with the career technical education programs and the question of articulation, course articulation, and sequencing. And so basically course articulation happens when a school is in collaboration with a post-secondary institution, and they make some agreements about a course that would be taught at the high school by a high school teacher. And then if a student were to successfully pass that particular course, when they go to a particular community college, and it doesn't work across all community colleges, the relationship is specific school to specific college, that students would be able to earn college credit for having successfully passed that course in high school, or would be able to waive entrance level requirements as a result of having taken that course. So the last time that we brought the SARCs, we did have one course on the books that was articulated, and because those agreements have to be renewed kind of periodically, and that articulation agreement lapsed. Right now, we don't have any courses that are articulated, but certainly would look to in the future reestablish relationships with post-secondary institutions in order to develop some articulation agreements. So that's all I have in terms of a presentation. If there are questions, I will entertain those. Otherwise, please discuss.
Board? I had one question I think came up. I'm not sure I have a clear answer. There's refers here to CTE programs. There are CTE pathways and there are CTE courses. Can you distinguish?
Yes. A CTE class would be any standalone class that was labeled as CTE in a course catalog. So, for example, culinary might be identified as a CTE class. CTE pathways are a series of 2 or more courses that are sequenced, and the goal is through the grants that we are participating in, the goal would be that we would develop pathways. So that would be developing sequences of courses, so not just one standalone course. And sequences and programs are essentially kind of interchangeable in terms of the terminology. So we have several CTE classes. We have a couple of the classes have an introductory level course and then an advanced level course. And then we do have, back to the culinary example, we have Culinary 1 as a class, and then have approved and is on the books a second level culinary course, but students have to take the course for the sequence or the pathway or the program to be realized. So that essentially is the difference. Does that answer the question? Am I right?
Is there a distinct definition of CTE program, or is that kind of a synonym for class?
Program would be interchangeable with pathway.
Oh, okay.
Or sequence. Yeah.
All right. Thanks. Other questions? Charlie.
So I believe the purpose of these SARCs is to make information about schools available to the public so that people could get a sense of each school. And they certainly do. I'm wondering, do we post them on our website? And if, I'm sure they're available through the state as well, but our website is something we could complement these reports with something else. I'm thinking that it would be really nice to have a video of each Spotlight on School presentation that somehow complemented these reports, which are full of numbers and data and so forth. But the flavor of the school maybe comes through so much better when we have the Spotlight on Schools. So I just thought I'd put that out there as an idea that somehow when we post it, we could kind of pair the two.
I think that's a really wonderful idea. In contexts in which I've worked before, we have really used the video medium a lot to really promote different programs that are happening at school sites. So I think that would be a wonderful idea to explore and try to pull off.
Thanks, Charlie. That's a question. One of the things that people look for in these are trends, and we don't have really multi-year data. Will there be in the future, as we get more years of the new testing, or will it always, are these SARCs always just for the last 2 years?
Yeah, so my experience has been that typically we just have the current year and then the prior year to compare to. We do in other venues collect a lot of this information and report a lot of this information to the governing board and to the community. And so while we might not, in the particular format that we're using right now, be able to reflect more than 2 years worth of data, certainly we could, as we are sharing kind of the longitudinal data sets, also share that publicly so that that resource is available. The template through CDE that we used this year only allows for the 2 years. If we wanted to look at a different template, maybe there would be a possibility of including more years of data. The other thing I would say about that is, as you mentioned, because the testing programs have changed so significantly, it will take a few years to amass enough years of data to make the data really comparable.
Anyone else? Kim?
Just a small item. I think that there was a typo on, let me see, 165 about it's the list of AP classes at McGregor. I just think that's worth clarifying. I think we did read these carefully, but they do speak for themselves.
And we did, thank you for pointing that out. We will make the correction when the SARCs come back for approval at the next board meeting. The typos and errors that were highlighted will be corrected. So thank you for also reading them so closely. Sometimes I think when you spend a lot of time looking at words on a page, it starts to look right to you. So thank you very much for looking at them closely.
Thanks. Any comments or questions on these SARCs from the audience? Is the board okay with bringing these back in the consent calendar at the next meeting?
Yeah.
Yes. Okay. Thanks. Albany High School grading practices.
Thank you, President Black. This was a topic that the board asked us to have agendized as a review and discussion on grading practices. And we do have board policy 5121 around grades and evaluation of student achievement. And so I thought I'd turn this back over to Marie Williams, but this is an opportunity for the board to discuss the issue around grading and alignment. And I know that we have some folks in the audience. Principal Ritchie is also here, so she'll be able to answer some questions. Let me turn this over to Marie Williams, please.
Thank you again. So what I prepared for you in terms of a backup document was just an accumulation of information that might be helpful or germane to this conversation. Whenever I am starting a board item and I'm not maybe entirely kind of clear what an outcome might be, I always look to board policy. And so here in board policy, we find that there is some direction to the superintendent or designee about establishing grading systems. But in general, grading practices essentially are kind of owned at the site level by departments or by teachers. And so I started I've provided for you just some information about our current cohort graduation rates. We are always about a year and a half behind in terms of graduation rate, and so we won't have 16, 17 cohort graduation rates until about March of this year. So we're always dealing with kind of fairly old data. Also provided for you information having to do with our cohort A to G completion rates. And then because we've been spending a lot of time, or I've been spending a lot of time providing information to the governing board about data sets from our California school dashboard, also wanted to provide that information for you. Just as another point of reference in your conversation, there was a request from one of our board members to provide the one-page handout that defines, according to the dashboard, college readiness. And so those handouts are at the back of the room for anybody who wants to look at those. And then I also did provide it on a slide here for you. And I don't have a formal PowerPoint presentation, but I did want to just flash this slide for you so that you can see. Last year in March, we talked quite a little bit about this slide. And again, this is just as it relates to the California dashboard. And so you'll see that the college and career indicator is identifying students as either prepared for college and career, or approaching prepared for college and career, or not prepared for college and career. And in both the prepared and approaching prepared categories, the student must first and foremost earn a high school diploma. And then you'll see the other ways that students can achieve the status of prepared or approaching prepared in relation to this particular metric. So I just wanted to show that. And then it's at the back of the room also, for those that want to look at it. So then some of the other information that I provided kind of reflects, I think, some conversations that the board has been having in the past about things. For example, the alignment of graduation rates with A to G rates seems to be a topic of conversation that kind of comes back periodically. One of the approaches that I identified in the backup document as a way potentially to close the gap between graduation rates and A to G rates was the concept of standards-based grading. And so I did ask Principal Ritchie if she would speak just for a few moments about the implementation of standards-based grading at the high school this year. And so appreciate if you would just take a couple of minutes. Thank you so much.
Thank you. We have started the process of full implementation of a standards-based program, which is called Power School, formerly known as Haiku. And so I've noticed that Haiku was the name used in the board backup, and we're referring to it now as Power School. So we'll be using that term from now on. Last year was a pilot year. We had a number of teachers pilot and give us some feedback on training opportunities. This summer, then, we organized training opportunities for all of our staff members. And so at the beginning of this school year, all staff members were trained on how to use Power School. And this year is the learning year for all of our staff members to actually use it. We adopted it primarily because it did allow us to have a platform for standards-based grading. And what you'll notice is that a number of teachers are very comfortable with that, and a number of teachers are still in their learning curve because, again, it's also being used as a grade book, a traditional grade book where you store some of the information in terms of assignment completion. The idea of using it as a standards-based report card, which would be reported out to students and to other stakeholders, again, that's something that we're learning how to do this year, and we're meeting with a number of stakeholding groups, including students, how they're using it, parents, how they're using it, but we do need to circle back around to our staff. We need to understand what the gaps are, what the advantages are to keeping this program for its utilization purposes of being a standards-based program. The compliance with ARIES is disjointed sometimes, and so again, a lot of our parents, a lot of our stakeholders are still getting their information from ARIES, which does not allow for a standards-based platform. So again, I'll go back to the idea this year we're learning what we can do to promote standards-based feedback to our students and stakeholders.
Can you explain a little bit how a standards-based grading, not how,
What it
how
is.
standards-based grading compares to more traditional
absolutely.
grading?
So standards-based grading 101 is the idea. And a real nice comparison in this district, for example, would be to take a look at the elementary report cards and compare them with the middle school and the high school report cards. An elementary report card in this district is standards-based. What you'll see as a parent, what you'll see as a student if you're reading it, are a list of the standards broken down by discipline. So you'll have English language arts, you'll have your math, you'll have your social studies. If you flip it over, you'll actually have citizenship as well. Those standards are then based on a rubric matrix, which allows teachers to really give succinct examples of where a student might have strengths within the guise of English language arts or math, again, broken down by the standard, and then where there might be gaps. And so you'll see that that rubric is used throughout the year. The 3 times the parents are able to see their students' growth, again, indicates whether or not you're on a 1 to 4, making some growth within the individual standards. The elementary report card does not have an overall grade, let's say something that's been synthesized down to a letter grade. Sometimes those letter grades are based on a percentage. For example, we have 90% traditionally up would be an A, 80%, 70%, and so forth. So the standards-based report card allows you to really dig deeper into the academic standards and the social emotional standards that you would expect a student to achieve in that particular course or that particular discipline. So compared to a traditional report card, again, sometimes you'll see that those are based on a percentage of achievement, and that percentage is then translated into a traditional letter grade, so an A through F.
Questions? Kim?
Okay, this might be simplistic. My understanding of a standards-based approach is that you're grading on whether they've demonstrated mastery of the standard. But for example, I having been to many back-to-school nights and have seen many different teachers' rubric of how they grade. There's often a component, say, of homework. You get a certain number of points for homework. But my understanding is that if you were to move to standards-based grading, that wouldn't be the case. So a student who was very smart and knew could demonstrate they mastered the standard, but who was unable to turn in an assignment on time or even at all, would still be getting that full standard. Is my understanding correct?
That could be one avenue that you adopt if you're going to be adopting a standards-based report card that is specifically giving you feedback on the academic standards. We spoke a little bit about this with a few staff members, though, and some of the standards that you can start to incorporate would be those executive functioning standards as well. And so if you did incorporate the two, you might actually get some feedback not just on a student's academic achievement and how well they're accessing their academics, but you would also be able to see factored into that standards-based report card how they're doing on assignment completion, how they're doing on working with groups, how they're doing on following instructions, how they're doing and what are the impacts of their attendance on that particular course. And so you could actually blend both.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks. I like that approach because, after all, when you leave school and go into the working world, you might understand everything about the company, but if you don't show up for work, you're not going to get paid.
Correct.
So kids really need to learn both.
Yes.
Other comments or questions? One of the reasons that I was very interested in getting this on the agenda, and I don't know if there's anything really to say about it, but it ties in with the standards-based grading and with our high school graduation requirements and the A through G requirements. We accept a D in a class, in a required class, as an acceptable grade for graduation. It's not accepted by the universities, colleges in California for A through G. And I don't think that there's any teacher who would advocate that a student who got a D in a class had actually mastered the essential standards of that course. So it's just my personal feeling that we're not doing kids any favor by letting them graduate with a D in a class. I'm not interested in just saying, okay, there are no Ds, so instead of flunking the kid, give them a C. That's not what I'm talking about. In order to achieve a no D for graduation policy, we would need to have the supports in place that would make it possible for any kid who got a D to make up the credit in that class, to learn the standards before they graduated. So I don't know if anyone had any thoughts on whether it would be possible to do that and what it would take to get it done. That might be a lot to ask. Miriam?
I was going to take a stab at it, but I'll wait till Miriam makes her comments.
So, two areas of comment, right? One is about process. So it's really inappropriate, frankly, for the board to spend 45 minutes discussing a topic that we haven't had a chance to know was going to be on the agenda in a way that would allow all the committees and the department chairs and the teachers to give you thoughtful feedback. To just put it on the agenda is not a communication, it's not site-level decision-making. So I don't know how you expect to get any kind of reasonable thought here, because we can only represent a few people that we were able to talk to before this meeting. If you believe in site-based decision-making, then when you have a concern or an interest or a question, you should ask the site to discuss it and come back to you. Or you should go to the site and participate in the committees and the processes that happen at the site. With regard to that, we have a instructional council at the school that consists of parents and teachers and students, and that is the appropriate place for discussion about grading policy to happen. And then you can get a report from that group that's really representative of a lot of different people's thinking and well-processed ideas, and that's how you should be having discussions with the board. So here we are. What I can tell you about grading is that it's like a lot of things we do at school. You hire really good people, and the school district works not because anybody's telling them what to do, but because everybody gets up in the morning and tries to do their very best at what they can do. And because every student and every parent gets up every morning and tries to give us their very best. That's what works. When we try to tell people what to do, then they're not motivated to do what they do best. I don't know a teacher who doesn't spend a lot of late nights and wake up in the middle of the night thinking about an individual student's grade, and could there be something that we could do, that we could change, that we could alter to make that more fair? Did I do the right thing there? I don't know any teacher who doesn't revise their whole grading strategy routinely, because they're constantly thinking about the unintended impacts of even the smallest thing that they might do. So I grade on a standards-based system for some of the courses that I teach, and using a traditional grade book for some of the courses that I teach. But to call it a traditional grade book would be weird, because I've changed it many, many times. I've removed make-work assignments in order and refused to grade them in order to focus on high-value assignments. I've included alternate assessments. I've changed the ratio of mastery to workload kind of credit. I've changed the math on the thing. I've changed, and then I change it based on individual students. And, so-and-so was suffering from depression, and so I gave them 2 assignments off, cleared the grade book of that. And so-and-so was working an evening job, and so I changed the quiz system entirely to not have it happen at the beginning of class, because they're never awake then, So I'm constantly changing everything, and what you hire me to do is to, and chose me for to have a master's degree to do is that, is to make that decision on a case-by-case basis, and to struggle with it, and to wrestle with it, and to worry about it, and I do that, and the parents do that with me, and the students do that with me. When a student gets a D, it doesn't just mean that they don't have mastery. That's one of the things it means. It also means something happened. A lot of things could happen. And so sometimes a D is the best a person can do. Sometimes a D is the best they want to do. Sometimes a D is an opportunity to move on when to do otherwise would be sort of an intellectual entrapment of a person who's still developing their priorities and their sense of the way they go. So I almost never use Ds, actually. My average grade in my classes is A-, and the standards-based courses, no one really cares how I do the standards-based course, because they can't understand it, and no matter how many times I explain it, I still end up just, people say, give me the grade. What was the grade, right? So it's always the same. It's A-, yeah. Because why do all my kids get A-? Because the ones who are getting Ds, I stay up and I follow up and I call them and I go to their house and I bug them and I track them down in the hall. So it's that kind of worrying about each kid that is actually what gets people through high school, and the grades are the grades that they need to be. So when I give a D, it's because that was the best the student could do, the best I could do for them, the best that we needed to do, and we needed to move on. And it represents that they didn't get an A to G requirement, but it also represents that they might get out of high school. And that is a valuable thing sometimes, and sometimes that's what a person can do. So it's a super complicated thing. And when you change your grade book to standards-based, it has a huge effect on the whole course and the dynamic between the teacher and how you change it is complicated and requires an enormous amount of revision of everything you've thought about in your course. It's not just about using PowerSchool. It really isn't. That's the tiniest part of it. The biggest part of it is rethinking your whole course and figuring out what exactly it is you're going to do and how you're going to be sure that you get multiple points of assessment on that. And so my point here is complicated question and procedurally inappropriately asked, but we have, I think, the important thing to notice is a common philosophy, which is that we're here to do the very best we can for the students, and that each student is each student, and each grade is each student's grade, and a grade book should not penalize students for being who they are, and it should try to reflect the best that they can do. And that's about, and it should try to communicate something to colleges. And so we all agree on that. After that, it's let us do our job.
So, just a second. From the procedural point of view, just want to point out that you, Miriam, know very well the board cannot come to decisions except in board meetings. So 2 of us could have had a discussion about this, but the board as a whole could not have. So the only way we can actually come to you and ask you to think about it is by putting it on the agenda in a board meeting. So I didn't mean to be, I hope, I'm sorry, it gave the impression that we were pushing for answers tonight because we're not. The point of having it on the agenda was just to raise the question so that you could have the discussions. Also, I think it's highly inappropriate for the board to tell teachers how to teach, and I have no intention of doing that either. So it's really more a question of what can the board or the district do to give more support to you in supporting students. If we could somehow help more students to get past that D and to recover a grade by changing any policies that the board has control over, that's what I want to know. And I'm not asking for the answers tonight, but the board, it had to be on the agenda for the board to discuss, even to ask the question. Charlie.
So thank you for making that point. I, too, was going to make the same point. I appreciate having it on the agenda so that we as a board can decide if there's even a question for us to be sending back for staff discussion. I don't know if there is yet or not, and I think we have to have some conversation to find out if that's the case. I do appreciate actually having a chance to talk about it because I've had a chance to think a little bit more about what question I might have and whether anybody else would have any similar question. I've thought a lot about the meaning of grades, which have changed over the years considerably. There was a time long ago when a C was an average grade. It was just thought of as average, and a D was a little below, and then B was a little above. And that was a long time ago. And it's really clear that that's not the case now. If CSU and UC each have a policy that to be college ready requires a grade of C or better, clearly they are thinking about the grades differently than what I just described. So one of the questions I think I'm starting to kind of stumble to is I'd really love to have feedback from staff as to what staff thinking is about the way UC and CSU thinks about those grades. Is there even a reason for us to think about grades the same way that UC and CSU seem to be thinking about grades? Maybe there is, maybe there isn't. I don't know. So I'd put that out as a question that I think is worth thinking about a little bit.
Russ, and then
A couple of things. I think it's quite possible for both the board and Miriam to be right, that this is a review and discussion issue. We are talking about some things for the first time. There are going to be no actions taken tonight out of this, at least not by the board. On the other hand, nobody ought to be surprised. So if there's a discussion about grading, having that come out last Thursday in the agenda as opposed to in January, we're going to take up grades. Now, we've talked about wanting to address grades for a while, and we're not going to be making any board decisions tonight. I think we could have done a better job at sort of indicating for this community what we want to talk about and when. In addition to studying Gaelic over the break, I finished up a Columbia online course via edX on student learning. And as a parent of a kid in the district, as a school board member, I saw some really great stuff in there. I finally understand why spiral approaches to learning are great. I'm sort of absorbing the idea of students learning and the kid who passes with an A because they crammed the night before and doesn't remember it 2 months later is not a win for us. The kid who struggles and struggles and struggles and they're running a D average, but by the end of that semester, they know this material shouldn't get a D. That kid has mastered the material. So I'd really like to address mastery as a measure and not what's your grade because you bombed that first test and by the end of that semester you really pulled it up and you shine and you know what you need to know. I was really struck by the comment in the course that yet is a very powerful word. You don't know this yet. Okay, a month later when I test you and you know it now. We should always be able to say, you don't have it mastered yet. Try again, try this. Let me hear what you're trying. Lots of great stuff. I actually really recommend. This was an online course through edX, 4 weeks. It was a quite interesting thing to absorb. Lastly, I'd like to throw in when we talk about grades across the whole spectrum of things, I think we should talk about policies, some ones we have that I don't think are adhered to, some good practices that are not. It would be great for student stress not to have language courses give effectively 40% of their grade in the last week in the final. 20% oral, 20% written is 40% of your grade coming in 2 days of class. And then I'm aware of at least one class where the teacher gives you credit towards your grade if you don't use your bathroom passes. That's bad. That's just bad. We don't reward students or punish students for things that are outside of academia. It's, we're not going to grade people by their bladders if I can help it. So I'd love to know that the school's addressing issues where grading just doesn't conform to evaluation in an academic setting, be that what you know or how you learn. Please don't grade students on whether or not they really need to go to the bathroom third period after everything they drank first period.
Vin?
Absolutely. So this is just a little comment in terms of the student perspective in terms of grading. So I think that one of the things that makes Albany such a amazing school environment is the teachers. And what I mean by that is the teachers don't just teach. They're not there to deliver the material and have you learn it. They also, at least in my experience, all of my teachers have been very supportive people, both in terms of school and other things. And what they really do is they push you to do your best. And I think that's something that's really amazing. And so I think that I really like what Ms. Walden said about, just letting staff kind of have their freedom in terms of what she does for grading, because I absolutely agree. I think that, when C, at a point C was the average grade, but now it means something totally different. And I think that in terms of students who get Ds and Fs and like that, it's not just one of those things where they slack off and just happen to get that grade. It's usually something much more serious than that causes them to do so poorly in that class. And so I think when we allow teachers certain freedoms and certain, just like leeways in terms of how they want to grade their class, how they want to handle grading, I think that supports the student much better because the student is in contact with the teacher. The teacher knows the student. And by doing that, they can really formulate the student's grade to reflect what the student knows and what the student is dealing with, so that we're not all graded against some standardized scale that grades everyone as the same, because no one is the same. No one faces the same struggles. No one faces, same issues. A kid who, might be able to wake up super early in the morning and have a great breakfast should not be graded the same as a student who struggles to wake up in the morning and doesn't have time to eat. And so I think that the point I'm trying to come to here is that I believe we should give staff and teachers a lot more freedom because they know the students better and they can better help the students. And I think that in terms of Ds, it serves as a very positive way in terms of saying, yes, you are struggling in this class, but it's not, you're not going to fail high school. And I think that just that little area between a D and an F can provide a lot of incentive for students to do better in that class. And it allows teachers to really work with them and notice when a student's struggling without the student facing the risk of not passing high school. Thank you.
Kim? Alexia, go ahead.
Go ahead, Alexia.
I just wanted to respond to something that Vice President Stapleton Gray mentioned, and I wanted to caution you on kind of pointing out and pulling out some information out of context when it comes to a teacher's grading policy, and whether or not the foreign language department or any particular teacher has a code of conduct or something else that's within their grading policy. I would suggest that we explore that further before making some general statements about how that impacts a student's grade, because I think, as many people said, there's a lot of flexibility when it comes to what the final grade would be, and the expectation in the class, if it's not to abuse the bathroom pass or if it's to actually have a lot of information and weighting on the end of the course, then I just caution us to explore why a teacher has that grading policy before we jump to conclusions about that.
Kim?
I'm happy to be having this discussion, and I think of it in terms of help and of what we can do for our students' future. I don't know, Marie, can you go back up to that slide you presented with the college and career ready? Because this is somewhat about grades, but this is somewhat about graduation, and both of those are sort of code words for our students' futures, and that's the important thing. I think that one thing that we can do for our students' future is we can make sure that these different pathways are available to them at Albany High, and they're not at this point. Not all of those pathways are available. Some students want to be college ready, some want to be career ready. And I think that it deserves our effort to try to make sure that all of these pathways do become available. And then for the students who want to be college ready and who may be surprised as seniors, despite the academic counseling office, which I think is very excellent. I think that some students do face the surprise in their senior year when they realize that they don't have that language requirement, or that there's some sort of a problem with their transcript that's not going to enable them to apply to CSUs or UCs. I think that one thing that we could do to keep that from happening is to have to include the parents in the loop, and to have some sort of a check-in, maybe on the report cards that shows progress on the A through G requirements. Because one thing I know as a parent is, a lot of times I might skip checking in on Aries, but for darn sure I look at my kids' report cards. And if I saw that there was, a problem heading our way with the A through Gs, I think that I would work with my child and with the school to try to head that off. So I think we need to look at those things, which are very much tied into this discussion. And I wanted to revisit a little bit the idea of having it's an interesting idea to instead of having the D, having an incomplete, and what President Black said is trying to offer the students a chance if they wanted to take that again before they get the D, or to help them find a place where they could take that class. To sometimes they might just want to go ahead and have the D. That's a choice. But if we can support our students towards success, that would be my priority.
Thank you.
Let me give you a parent perspective on this. There was something you said about, Kim, there was something you said about preparing the students, and that's the goal. Is it? Is it? Is it preparing them, or is it to keep up Albany's reputation? Is it to keep up Albany, the appearance of Albany's reputation? Because what I heard Ms. Walton say sounded more like preparing the students. That's what she just said. That's what resonated with me anyway. Can you keep that up, please? Because there's a reality that they will face when they leave here. And that reality says, number one, that the world is run by C students. It's not run by A students. They're run by C students. We got one in the White House right now. That's who runs the world. And the rest of us hyper A students, the ones who stay up to 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning, we're the ones who support those students. A D doesn't end the world. I have one of those A+ hyper students at my house right now who I have to keep from trying to go over the edge at 16 and a senior in high school. I have to try and help her find that balance. Her 2 older brothers who graduated from here have learned that lesson. You know when they learned it? That first semester of college, when they left here. And you have seniors in high school here who have overloaded themselves with AP and honors classes and who are killing themselves. They're not getting enough sleep, they're popping pills, they're drinking and smoking and doing all the things we don't want them to do to try and maintain what they think they're supposed to do to meet these so-called A to G requirements. And a lot of them aren't even going to UCs and CSUs, where these so-called A to G requirements don't even matter. My child's not going there. She didn't even apply to any UCs. She applied to 2 schools in California, Stanford and USC. All the schools she applied to are back east. So it doesn't matter to me when you send me some piece of paper that says A to G. It didn't mean anything. So what I suggest you do is look at the curriculum and make sure that they are prepared, not just academically, but socially. And that's what I heard coming out of her mouth. They need balance. They need to leave here as good people. They need to leave here and know that that so-called spare time and free time that they're going to get in college, because every single moment from 8 to 3 is not dictated as it is in high school. I'm going to tell you this right now. It's not free time. It's called extra study time that I need to figure out what to do, or else I'm going to get behind time. That's what it's called. That's how you prepare them. You prepare them to know that just because you were an A student in high school and you wrote really, really, really good papers, and the first time that professor writes on your paper in red, it's not the end of the world. You're not going to die. But it's going to happen because you're going to go to a school and you're going to end up in one class where everyone's just as bright as you are. You're going to get that one professor who, just because you were at Albany High and everybody thought you were terrific, you were the star of the school academically, you're going to end up in that first class in college, and the professor's going to not know your name, not going to care, and you're not so terrific. And you're going to be crushed if they don't prepare you. Your ego's not going to take it if they don't prepare you. And that's what she's trying to tell you. That's what the staff is trying to tell you. That's the preparation. If you really want to do that, support the staff and let them do their jobs in that particular arena. Don't switch the grading system to pamper them. These babies are resilient. What happened last spring should tell you that. They'll adjust, and as parents, we will too. I don't want you padding the grading system to make them feel good. They got a D, they probably deserved it. I had 2 sons come out of here, and if they ever came home with a D, I want to know what happened. I was up here in a moment with a C. Thank goodness it wasn't a D, but with C. I wanted to know, okay, let's talk this through. What happened? What was missing? If it said missing paperwork on the Aries, I want to know where the paperwork was. It wasn't the teacher's fault. It was usually something my son did. Let's talk it out. Let's figure out what happened. That is the genius of Albany. And not all the teachers are great. I'm going to tell you that right now. Not all of them are like this. Not all of them are like this. I read, write, translate 9 languages. And what you said is true. It shouldn't be, Alexia, it really shouldn't be that 40% of your grade comes down to the last few weeks of a final. And that's what happens. Do you know how hard it is to stand up in front of a teacher and give an oral final? That is very difficult, even when you've been speaking that language your entire life. And my children, sometimes they freeze. And that's difficult for those children to handle. So that one thing I do want to make sure we do look at. You shouldn't have to bring that down to just that one instance of not being able to all of a sudden remember something in that instance. But we need to spend some more time making sure that they're socially and psychosocially ready when they leave this school, not just academically. Thank you.
Hey guys. So, wait, can you guys hear me? Okay, I'm gonna be real. I want to be professional, but that's not me. So I'm just gonna speak how I speak. So to give a bit of a background, I've been in Albany School District entire life, and what you guys are talking about, and what I really respected about Miss Walden, I didn't catch your name. I think I know who your daughter is. But pretty much is that I am that D student. I've received a D, and so when you look in paper, you're like, all right, she was doing pretty well, but then she didn't do well here. All right. But then also behind the D is depression, doing 2 jobs, single parent, younger sibling I need to take care of and need to make dinner, abusive relationship, and just life, and I'm tired. So, but then I can still get an A. And also speaking about having to prepare for college, if I told you that while I got that D, I also received 2 A's in college courses while I got that D, to the point where I'm ready for college, and it's actually not, I know it's difficult, but I'm ready for it, and it's not that bad to what everyone's saying it is. And really speaking from it, I say we have the institutions put in place to help people who are struggling, but the resources aren't really being used. And by that, I'm saying, for starters, coming to a student too late, because, say if it's right now, say if I have a D right now, and you're like, Simone, you're not doing the, Simone Mitchell, by the way, hi. And you're like, Simone, you're not doing too well. Why are you gonna come to me 2 weeks before the final telling me that I'm not doing well when you could have came maybe earlier and said some stuff? So you can come to the student earlier, and we have for example, we had the flex office for tutoring, and you can do extra work, extra credit, and then you can turn late assignments. But the thing is, not all the teachers accept that. I know several, let me put it this way, the entire math department doesn't accept late work. that brings your grade down. A lot of teachers don't give out extra credit or don't believe in extra credit, brings your grade down. You don't always have time to go to the teacher. So pretty much it's needing to take resources in place. And also teachers, I don't want to say teachers, you need to work with your students, but I feel a lot of times students sometimes are too afraid to go out and go reach out to go help with their grade if they need help, or they become helpless in a sense. Because Albany, it's to that point where, how do I describe this? Navin, Mahima, I know you guys. Mahea also. We're all students. Hey, Justin and Jake in the back. I'm going to ask you guys a question. How many of you guys have heard this? Oh my God, I got a 92 on the test. No. How many of you guys have heard that? Yeah. Yeah. So Albany is getting to that point where, like, when C was average, 94 is average. And I'm not even kidding. And, like, again, like, the D isn't in the end of the world, but also just to put those institutions in place. And if you see, if, say, it's October and your student has a D, and it's still November and they still have a D, let me go talk to Simone real quick. Let me see what's happening. Personally, from getting an A in Miss Walden's class, what's up, Miss Walden? Like, I know teachers, they can go and help the student and go talk to them, but not going to them earlier in a sense. It's not going earlier, and sometimes people don't have enough time to coordinate with stuff like if I'm messing up in one class and I need to go during like a free period to do something, I can't always, if I'm messing up in two classes, I can't always do something like that. If I'm behind an art project, what are you gonna do? Give me extra credit? No. What's gonna help with the art project? Give me more time to finish the art project, but I'm gonna get behind other stuff. So we're all busy people. Anyone have a job and is a student here? No? All right, I took a risk. Oh, all right, see, there's two in the back. The point is, as Albany students, of course, like, regardless, first of all, not everyone's gonna go to college. And realistically, stop scaring everyone, ooh, it's not gonna be that easy when you go to college, ooh. We'll figure it out. Everyone's everyone. Not everyone's gonna go to college. Not everyone wants to go to the same college. Not everyone needs A through G requirements. So going to a student and making a plan with them individually, because like I'm not the same as everyone else. I'm only one of me. I'm only Simone, only one. But I think we need to have the institutions take the institutions we have in place and use them. Like repeating, just like extra work, like extra credit, accepting more late work, giving more time, reaching out to the student, and then like how Ms. Walden was saying, like making arrangements, just like saying, like, all right, like you missed these, and like we'll work with you, and say for this test that you do well, I'll make it worth double so it can boost up your grade. Like making little things like that. And I'm gonna be really real. Like what you guys are saying, it really sounds like you really want to keep up Albany's like prestigiousness, and like realistically, not everyone's gonna have an F, not everyone's gonna have a D. But sure, like you don't want enough D's, or do you want like, oh, we don't accept D's in Albany? Like it's gonna happen. There's life. Like you could be a good, cool person, and then your grandma dies right before finals. Speaking from personal experience, it doesn't really help you when you're trying to focus on what's the equation for this again. It's not gonna help. Life happens. So just taking the institutions in place and really putting them to work. And yeah, I couldn't remember anything I was gonna say. So yeah.
Thanks. Ben?
Yeah, I don't want to take away from Mahea's time, but I just really quickly did want to say something that I've heard from a lot of students. I feel like in Albany, sometimes we forget what success means. I feel like sometimes we think that success means going into a STEM field, you know, pursuing these high-paying jobs at these prestigious universities. But I think something that we often forget is that success is what the student defines it as it is to them. Success to some person could mean going to a prestigious college and getting a really high degree and all this stuff. But success to another person could simply mean getting a good-paying job and helping their family out. And other things. And I think that in Albany, we often idealize success is as in pursuing higher education and pursuing, these standards that are very high and pushing ourselves to that standard. But I think that we should really be focusing on what a student's success means to them and what standards they want to meet themselves. And I think that's something we should keep in mind when pursuing just different ideas around grading and what we define as success.
Thanks, Mahima.
So I've only been in Albany for the past 5 years, but one thing I've noticed is every single student is successful, and that inside the classroom, but also outside. You see people, and we don't talk about it either. I mean, in terms of grades and stuff, we talk about that all the time. We do that all the time. But I think in terms of the other loads that we carry, the other roles that we have outside the classroom, we never talk about that. And I think we need to work to make the grading something that teachers have the ability to really shape to their classes and their course loads, but also something that's reflective of the students' abilities. This goes back to the things we've talked about many times. What do we value in an AHS graduate? Is it just someone who's college ready? Is it someone who's ready to go out into the world and do multiple things? And a lot of the times when we look at the grading system, I mean, last year I got my first B. It was very crushing for me. But one thing I will say is every single grade you get, like if there's 2 A's on your transcript, 2 A's, not the same worth. When you look back at the class, you think about the work you did for 1 A, you compare it to another, not all A's are created equal. And then when I look back on my junior year transcript and I look at that B, second semester I still got a B, but I worked a lot harder for that B. And I think those sort of things where students are able to rise up and change something about how they learn and how they approach a class, those things don't really appear on a transcript where there's an A and a B and a C and a D. And when it's about what we want at the end of the day for an AHS graduate. Do we want them to regurgitate information for a test that's worth 20% of their grade and then graduate with A's and B's? Or do we want someone who goes out with, who has a diploma with a D on it, but, was able to work for that D? And maybe that it doesn't look nice on paper, but I think it's about what grades represent for a person. So if we can find a way to make grades reflective of a student's abilities, implement more project-based activities, other ways to showcase a student's mastery of a subject, I think that's when we're going to be headed in the right direction, rather than framing it over, well, we want students who get the, D's don't sound good, but if a student is going out into the world, what's the difference between a C and a D? If I get a C and Navin gets a D, I mean, a C sounds a little bit nicer, but who knows, maybe I didn't work half as hard as Navin did. So I think it's about making the grades reflective of students' abilities.
I'm Ahaya. You guys know me. I've only been in Albany for 2 years, and I started at Albany High School halfway through my sophomore year. And I used to go to school in Northern California, Ukiah, in a really rural town where it was pretty easy. And I was in mostly honors classes and AP classes, and I was getting straight A's. And I came to Albany, and I struggled really hard. And I think a lot of that has to do with what you were saying, the social aspect, because in Ukiah, no one cared what I wore, and no one cared what I looked like. And in Albany, that's a really big part of the culture here. You have to have brand name clothes, and you have to look impeccable all the time. And that's really hard. It's a lot of strain on a student when you're trying to do well in school. Last year, I got 2 C's and a B and then A's. And that was really hard for me because I've been used to straight A's my entire life. And I think that has a lot to do with the culture of Albany High School and the popular kids and how half the school isn't seen. And a lot of people know me for speaking very strongly about this when I have projects and journalism articles. This is what I talk about and this is what I write about. And I definitely think that Albany has a lot of things to fix. And since last year, people have been getting a lot better because of what happened. But it's still not as good. I still see racist people and sexist people and anti-Semitic people every day. And I hear comments about that stuff every day. And that also has a lot of strain on how I feel in school. It's not
a very positive place for me anymore. Like when I first got here, I had friends, and then as the years went on, it's gotten worse for me, actually. It hasn't gotten better. And this year, I find that it is a little bit better. But I still think that the school and the culture and how students act to other students isn't good for anyone. It's not good for the students, it's not good for the teachers, and no one's really doing that much about it. We're more focused on if people are cutting in the lines at break and having water bottles in the vending machines. And I think we need to be focusing more on the culture and how students' relationships are instead of problems like that.
Hello, everyone. My name is Jake Mahari. Just for reference, I have been in Albany schools all my life since the Children's Center with Nivin. I'd like to talk about specifically things that we can do in the future. I know that there's a very structured, there's a certain amount of time that we have here, and then there's also a very structured purpose to this. And I'd like to kind of talk about, first of all, a little bit of context in terms of grades. I do believe that something that is very prevalent in Albany is that like people do have to dedicate a lot of their time towards studying and almost all of their time to, grades, maintaining all those, your straight A's and maintaining everything you can, doing everything you can to make sure that that's there. And what's, as a byproduct of that, what it's caused is that certain people feel the need that I feel as though the grades are far more important than any other thing in their life. And with me on just to kind of show you a little bit about myself, I actually have, taken a little bit of a different approach. I do several things outside of school. On my college applications, I fill up the extracurricular section to the max until it can't hold anything anymore. I am also on a board, a statewide organization, also operating under a several $million budget. I am in youth and government. I coach a basketball team at the high school. I I tutor younger kids as well. And it's these things that that are my passion, right? I enjoy doing these things, and I realized that, the point of my life is not to sit behind, a desk and study my hardest in order to do that good on that one paper. If I wanted to dedicate my time to that, I could easily get an A's in every single class without an effort. But the point, in life within a broader spectrum is to do things that you enjoy. And for what my interest is, I want to go into policy. I have dreams of becoming a Congress member. And these things in my life, the things that I do outside of school are things that have put me in that track. And in terms of direction, I think that something we can do a lot better is, like Ms. Walden said, I actually thought that was really interesting what Ms. Walden said, and if I had a lot more teachers like that, I'd be very happy like that take into account other things in your life, because, when you have someone like me that, dedicate almost the entire time to extracurriculars and doing other things like that, and that are academic, that are, that make me think a lot more than any school activity would, how can you measure that person's effort or will or capacity the same as the person sitting next to them, who maybe doesn't do anything outside of school, and not that they're bad students, but because they want to dedicate all of their time towards doing well in school. So I think something we can do better is kind of, take Ms. Walden's approach a little bit more into touch, have more teachers encompass other things that they do outside of school, because I know if I had a teacher that I could go up to and tell, this week I'll be giving a Martin Luther King address in front of 5,000 people, which I am this week. And if I could do that to a teacher and they would tell me, you know what, that's okay, I understand, get that assignment to me the next Monday. Or if they could tell me, yeah, you could take that test, you can have one more extra day on that test. That would mean a lot to me, because it shows, a sense of understanding, like Ms. Walden said. So directionally, I don't have a master's degree in educational policy, and I don't know how feasible that is. But if you could give the teachers their support in being able to do that, that would help a lot of us students as well, help the system a lot better, because then you're also taking into, you're taking the time and effort into account. You're not just saying that, this student, they do it a lot better in school when you measure that in. You have to take in what they do, their time and efforts. Same thing on any college application. And I think that in order for us to be more successful, you should we should be more understanding of the students. So if the board could take that into account when discussing issues like should a D be, is a D acceptable or not to colleges, or should we, push that as a thing for our school? Because I know, like what has been said before, a C is not average anymore. About an A is about an average for our school, and that's not necessarily a bad thing. That's a good thing. That's something we should all be proud of, is that students are working to get that. But the thing is, the means of getting to that point from A to B varied extremely for several people throughout our school. And I know that if I put the same amount of effort into school as some other people that I know, I would not be able to do the things that I do outside of school. I would not be able to do what I do to put myself on track for a bright career. So taking that into account, thank you for letting me speak.
Thank you. Ross?
So Jake, you won't be eligible to run for Congress till like 2026. How are you going to wait that long?
Yeah, comments or questions from the board? Vin?
Sure. So I just want to first of all say thanks to all the student speakers that come up. It means a lot to me because it's great to hear other people who have similar experiences. The general vibe I'm getting from the student testimony, I guess, would be that grades are only a measure of our academic success. And while that is definitely an integral part of our lives, especially going into colleges and other things like that, we are so much more than our grades. We're so much more than an A, a B, a C, a D, or an F. We're so much more than a 10%, a 50%, a 100%. And it seems that what most students are very interested in are having grades that not only reflect our academic ability, but reflect our character, our will, our drive. And I think that Jake really brought up some interesting points, not to definitely delve into different ideas on how we could do that, but when I've had teachers who are very strict on deadlines, and I think that that's very realistic to the world, we're going to encounter as adults. I don't expect my boss, to say, oh, you're going to go, speak with people? Well, you can push the deadline for this project back. And I absolutely don't expect that. But what is really great, and what is something that I love about some of the teachers I have, is understanding. The understanding that you are more than, that school isn't the only world you exist in, that, your life just doesn't stop and start when you enter those school doors. And I think that when you have teachers who demand hard work out of you and demand, like the best you can do, but also are understanding when it comes to pursuing things that you're interested in and pursuing things that you're passionate about, I think that that combination provides the best and most supportive learning environment that I have ever had. And so I think that that's something that we should definitely look into, and I think that Ms. Walden's a great example, but I think that we should take that into account when thinking about students and their academic grades and policies surrounding that.
Thank you. Okay, Hema?
One last thing. I was thinking about this as I heard the sentiment of, like what kind of person we want to leave, our district, whether it's college ready, career ready. And one thing that sort of popped in my head was in elementary school, though I didn't go to elementary school here, or maybe it was just kindergarten. We had report cards that didn't have letter grades, but rather like, this is the standard, I guess this is standards based, but also about what kind of a person you were in the classroom in terms of cooperating with teachers, cooperating with your classmates. And maybe it seems a little bit sophomoric because it's high school and it's sort of like, you want your, it's common sense. You want to talk to your teachers with respect. You want to meet deadlines. You want to work well with other people. But one thing that I've seen multiple times is you have great students who are kind, who show up on time, who work well with other students during group projects and get a certain grade. And then you have other students who show up right before the thing is due. They do it in a minute. They're rude to their peers. They're not well, working. They don't treat their teachers with respect, and they get a better grade. And I think when we're talking about, what we want an AHS graduate to be, is it just someone who can get the grades that they need to get into an Ivy League, or is it someone who can go out into the world, whether it's in college or whether it's in the workforce, and be someone who is cooperative, who can work well with others, who can work on a team? And I don't know if that's something that can be implemented into the grading system, whether comments can really encompass that, but I think it's a question of what kind of a person we want out there. So just some food for thought.
Thanks.
I'm Annie J. Fishberg. I teach at the high school, and I try to keep it short because I know we're wrapping up. But I've been rethinking my grades a lot and just going around and around in my head about what I want to do. And I switched a class to standards-based grading a couple years ago, and I love it. But I've gone to a lot of conferences where they've talked about how to think about grades and what you should think about when you're switching up your grade system. And one of the things that has been the most powerful to me was they started off with a question, and the question was, when your students go into Power School and they check their grades, what do you want to communicate to them? And it was like, wow, okay, yeah. And then the second question is your grade communicating what you want to communicate? Are they coming away with that information? And I think that I really learned a lot about my own grading system thinking about that question. But the other thing that that question makes really clear to me is that this isn't a decision that we can make at the board level at all. Like, that question is an individual teacher question. It's not even something that I could answer for another teacher. And so I want to thank everybody else who've talked. I think you had really good things to say, but I want us to keep that in mind, that I don't know. Like, I think there's a lot of things that the board can do to help support students who are struggling, but I don't know that making decisions about our grading policy is going to be able to do that. Thank you.
Thank you. And I just want to reiterate what I said earlier. It was not my intention that the board would be making any decisions about how you should be doing grading. It was my intention, when we put this on the agenda, to start this conversation so that you guys can know that the board is interested in you thinking about it, because that's what the board is really here to do. It's to support the schools and to give the district direction. So the direction I think that we're interested in is exactly what's happening tonight, is the thinking that's going on around grading. And we don't have the answers. And we're not going to dictate answers. We have no interest in dictating the answers. But we're really encouraged to hear from the teachers how it matters to you, and from the students that you have thought about this. And you've said a lot of very interesting, thought-provoking things that I think will be really worth going back and watching the tape and thinking about some more for all of us. I really want to appreciate that. Does the board feel that we have any specific instructions to give to staff, or should we just leave it here and say, let's go back, listen to all the comments again, and just think about it? And maybe in the future, we might ask staff to initiate some program, but we don't have any ideas about that right now. Navin.
I think that what Paul said is exactly right in terms of provoking kind of thought on the subject, and I think that, you know, we have a lot of representatives in terms of teachers here, and I think that this conversation, you know, will be discussed within the teacher community, and, you know, they're going to come back, and hopefully, you know, they'll have some more thought within, you know, their community on ways they could address this and ways that the board could help with this. And so what I'm hoping to see is teachers coming back in the future, or teacher representative coming back in the future, and letting the board know how we can better support you guys to make those decisions, and how to better support you guys to make the grading system that you guys see fit for your students.
Exactly. I could not have said it as well. Thank you.
Thank you.
Kim?
I have no specific direction in terms of grading at all. I didn't expect that I would. But what I do want to highlight is I found the numerous mentions of stress to be unsettling. I think that the level of stress at Albany High is something that we do need to have further discussions about. And hopefully, you know, maybe the wellness committee or other groups and staff, there's whatever, might have further ideas on how to try to mitigate that. From what I've heard, I feel that there's an unhealthy level of stress.
I think that's a good point. Okay, you're going to get the final word.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. Let me tell you a little something about stress. So for one thing, school is not that fun. It's kind of boring, right? And we're kind of forced to take a lot of classes, at least I am, that I really don't care about. I see no way it affects my life in any way, but I'm forced to take it. It's hard. I take it, I struggle, and I come out with these grades that people say are bad, and can't really go a lot of places with that. You know, there's not very much of a student-teacher relationship in a lot of classes. So you can't teach somebody you don't know. And when you're not being taught, and you're given a bunch of stuff, you get a lot of stress. And then there's the environment at the high school or any school, and it can contribute to more stress. And school is long. We have no breaks. We have a 10-minute break, and we have one cafeteria, and people get hungry, and there's some pretty long lines. So sometimes you just don't get any food. Then you gotta go back to class. Lunch is pretty short. You can't take a test when you're hungry. School starts early. A lot of people are tired. So I mean, yeah, maybe stress can play a really, really gigantic factor in a student's decline in their own academics.
Thank you. Good point. Okay. I want to thank you all for coming out and putting some thought into this. Thank you very much. Did you want to say something?
Actually, just want to echo and say we turn this back to Principal Ritchie and her staff to take on the leadership to continue the discussions at the site level, which is where the teachers said it belongs and where they're already having conversations. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so this brings us to a discussion of the 9% budget reserve policy.
Thank you, President Black. This is also an agenda item that the board wanted us to bring back, and this is to review and discuss the budget reserve policy that was adopted by the board back in 2015. And I'm going to turn this over to Alan Gard, our Chief Business Official, to give some preliminary background information, and then we will open it up for discussion with the board. Mr. Gard.
Thank you, Superintendent Williams. So I first just wanted to provide some information about what a reserve is. A reserve is needed to mitigate the impact of uncontrolled risks. For the state of California, as Superintendent Williams and Trustee Trutain mentioned, we are well below the national average in funding for education. We are near the bottom, and when you take a deeper look inside of the state of California, it's very difficult to compare districts to districts. So, for instance, 10% of the school districts in California, they have control over their entire budget. That means that they are not dependent on the state to receive funding, and they're able to make long-term decisions for their school district. The remaining 90% of school districts, which include Albany, are heavily dependent on the state of California and are dependent on the state to make predictable and long-term decisions that are good for education. Albany receives 80% of our revenues from the state, and so that's why we're heavily dependent on them. And the structure of the state is the structure of the state does not facilitate the ability to receive predictable and long-term decisions for education. The reason for that is because they have legislative as well as tax structure that change every year. We have a legislative structure that has an election every 2 years for the state legislators, and so the priorities of the state legislators change based on what they're hearing from their constituents. The tax structure from the state is such that the top 1% of California provides a third of the state revenues. And that's based on high income earners and a stable stock market, which has not really been all that stable. The state has, on average, had a recession every 7 years. And when education makes up 50% of the state's budget, it's an easy target for state legislators to use to balance their own budget, and then force school districts to make do with what the state provides. I just want to provide two charts which kind of talk about, well, actually, so first, included in the backup is just kind of how the state has addressed what the state did to survive from the Great Recession just a few years ago. Now, this is the Great Recession. This is not a typical recession, but it's something, it just provides a lens as to what state legislators are willing to do to balance their own checkbook. So here are some of the things that the state did, making sweeping cuts to programs, passing a lot of services down to the local level, which helps their own books, but doesn't help provide stable programs for school districts as well as cities and counties. They did a lot of gimmicks, which I'll get to in a moment, and they placed a measure on the 2012 ballot and said, if the state of California does not approve this measure, then there's going to be huge reductions in the middle of the year. And what school districts had to do was lay off staff, issue loans in order to meet payroll obligations each month. They had to have difficult conversations with local vendors and with utility agencies and explain why they're not able to make those payments because they had to prioritize payroll. The state allowed school districts to reduce the number of instructional days by 5, which some districts have done, and school districts have also implemented furlough days and utilized grants that were specific to one program and used it to pay the light bill. Albany did not have to issue loans to meet payroll obligations each month. They also did not need to issue certificated layoffs or reduce the number of instructional work days or implement furlough days. There were two reasons for that. One was with the support of the community, they were able to pass a emergency parcel tax in 2009, as well as they began the budget crisis with a healthy reserve.
Which was being spent down, right?
Which they utilized, which they spent down and in order to get by the recession. As I noted about the accounting gimmicks, here's just two charts that the state, here are two charts to show kind of what the state did. So, one second. So the top chart notes what's called deferrals, which are essentially the state has a schedule on how much they would pay each school district each month to provide a consistent cash flow for school districts in order to meet payroll. And it's somewhat in line with how schools are structured. So they provide 5% of what's due in July and in August, and then 9% the remaining months. Because of the major reductions during the Great Recession, where the state had to essentially where the state lost $130 billion over that same time period. What the state did was increase the number of deferrals that they passed down to school districts. And you can see here, this is before the Great Recession happened. They still had some deferrals, and then each year throughout the Great Recession, they just utilized that same gimmick and put more and more pressure on school districts. And so what this means is noted in the bottom chart, where the dark blue is, well, the bars represent how much the state should provide each year or each month. The dark blue is what they've actually provided, and then the light blue is what was supposed to be paid for, what was supposed to be paid out in February. They ended up giving it to us in September. And so that's essentially saying, like with a local vendor like Mary and Joe's Sporting Goods. So if we work with Mary and Joe's Sporting Goods and say, hey, we have this event coming up, can you provide some supplies? Okay, great. We receive the supplies in January, we receive an invoice in February, and we say, I'm sorry, we can't pay you that because we're not getting money from the state. We have to pay you in September. Well, that business has their own payroll obligations to provide. They have their own payments that they need to make because of the supply purchases that they've made in order to fulfill our needs. And so what the state did to solve their own problems pushed us to create problems with other agencies. And so because the state has a trend of looking out for themselves, because the state is structured so that that it's essentially a very volatile system that's based on high-income earners and a healthy stock market, we need to do what we can in order to mitigate the risks that we don't control. One way of doing that is by having a reserve. The reserve of 9% is such that it allows us enough cash to meet 1 month of payroll, and that was the main driver for. That was one of the main drivers for the policy. The other driver is because of the instability with the state, we wanted to ensure that we had time in order to engage stakeholders, in order to really think through issues and wait to see what kind of updates the state has before actions are needed. And with a 9% reserve policy, it does not mean that we can never go below 9% because we are below 9%. It essentially means that we have, throughout our normal course of business, a level that we want to reach and maintain given the uncontrolled risks that are passed down by the state. And so with that, I would turn it over to any questions from the board.
Questions or comments from the board? Russ.
So I was on the board when we adopted this resolution, and I think having a reserve of some amount is prudent, certainly if above 3%. A question to you, Alan, is about the state's rainy day fund. So they did in 2014 establish a rainy day fund. Are we going to anticipate that in the future the state is less a jerk about deferring payments because there's something on the order of about $8 billion plus in a rainy day fund now? Can we anticipate that the state will be more steady, won't do things like kick payments down the road?
Yes and no. So the rainy day fund for the state is great. It helps mitigate some of the risks in relation to a recession. However, even with $8 billion in reserve for the state, a typical recession for the state wipes out $55 billion over a 3-year period. And so even though 1 year it could help mitigate some of that risk, it won't do anything long term.
Charlie?
So I wanted to appreciate your mentioning the timely payment of vendors. As an independent contractor, I know what it's like to not get paid. That's pretty much what the Great Recession was for me. And I would find it unconscionable for us as a school district to not be paying our vendors and contractors and our staff in a timely way. So just wanted to appreciate your mentioning that. I wondered if we could look at the very last page, page 170 of the board packet. There we go. To me, this pretty much says it all. Our problem at the moment is not so much the reserve itself, it's the burn rate. So we are burning through reserves at the rate of 4 or 5 percentage points per year. That's an extraordinary burn rate. We are temporarily okay in that the first 3 columns is what applies today, and we are above that 3% required reserve in all 3 of those columns, but only because we have a large reserve right now. It's the larger reserve that lets us sustain the higher burn rate. If we were at a 3% reserve this year, that second column would be red. And that's kind of what we're looking at 2 or 3 years from now. So I appreciate the 9% reserve policy. I'm not too concerned about not having 9% the 3rd year out. I don't think that matters too much. But I think having a 9% reserve every time we adopt a budget is a good policy. If we don't do that, it means we can never deficit spend. With the 9% reserve, it gives us a little bit more flexibility to tolerate some deficit spending for a year or 2. So those are my thoughts.
Thanks. Others?
Yeah, I'd like to save my comments till the end and see if anybody in the audience has anything to say.
Okay. Kim?
I just want to put some numbers on it. So Alan, approximately what does our 9% reserve, what would that look like today under our current budget? And can you give an estimate of monthly payroll?
Sure. So a 9% reserve, 9% for this year is about $4.2 billion.
Oh, I wish.
You wish.
$4.2 million. We have an average for our payroll, which is staff, but also benefits, of about $4 million.
Thank you.
Okay. Comments, questions from the audience?
I have a few questions for you. Prior to the recession of 2008, do you know what our reserve was, kind of year by year?
It was just over 15% when we ended, I believe it was 2007-8.
15%?
Yeah.
Okay. And then one of the things I wanted to just mention is that I really do think that we need to think about our students and really put students first. I think that we need to be spending the taxpayer money on students. We survived the Great Recession. We've survived recessions that used to have occurred every 7 years. And I think that if we need to spend this money on our students very close to the classroom instead of holding it in a reserve. I think that having a reserve and savings that's 3 times greater than the state requirement, and the state did come up with this 3% for a reason. I don't think they came up with it so that, districts would all go bankrupt when there was some kind of, change in the state budget. That was what the state decided would be a budget, a reserve. And I think that having a budget reserve that's 3 times greater than the state is not allowing the students the opportunities they deserve. There have been some proposed cuts to school discretionary budgets, and if we keep this 9%, we will have to make those cuts. If we lower the reserve, we will not have to make the cuts. And so the question I have is, how is necessitating making site level cuts to maintain a padded reserve putting students first? Okay, thank you.
Sure. I should try to clarify that the 9% reserve policy and budget reductions are connected, but they're not the same. So regardless of what reserve we have, as long as we have a deficit in our budget, then in total, reductions would need to occur. By having a reserve of 9%, it allows us time to make thoughtful decisions. And with the reserve, it's just like a savings account, it's one-time money, and so it does not help students or staff long-term. What was the other? The state developed a mandate of 3% for a school district our size. There were essentially 2 reasons for that, and none of them have to do with recognizing the volatility with the state. The first one is in order to ensure that school districts have cash on hand in order to address things like a leaky roof or equipment failure or somebody going out on leave and having money available to cover that person. The other factor is it provides a warning sign for county offices of education who are required to provide financial oversight over school districts. And so it's an indicator that if we go below 3%, then the county office would want to provide oversight, input, and ensure that we have a plan and that we follow the plan in order to provide a stable budget.
Okay, and what is the maximum reserve the state's approved for districts of our size?
The state originally had what was called, so the state originally had 6%. That was adopted in 2014, and it was only if some various triggers were met that school districts would need to follow that 6%. But they've changed legislation to now allow 10% if different triggers are met. And those triggers have not been met, and it's focused on the second year out, not the current year. And so even if all the triggers are met, we would still be fine for the current year.
Okay, but it's not a 3% reserve is the state maximum. It's that's the minimum.
Correct.
Right. Okay. Other comments, questions on the board?
Sure.
I just want you to reiterate if you can. So you said that implied anyway that the maximum by the state is like with some criteria 10%, but we're at 10.31 on the second year where you said That's unacceptable. Basically you implied that, so now I'm confused. So can you reiterate what you mean here?
So I'm by second year, I meant the second subsequent year. And so with our current budget, then the second year is, that doesn't, it's kind of hard to see. But with our current budget, then the second year means 2019-20. 6 months from now, when I bring forward a budget for 2018-19, then the second year means 2021.
So, Alan, by second year, you mean second subsequent year, and that's the same as what I meant when I said third year out?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Jacob, did you want to make your comments?
Yeah, I just don't understand why we have to have it in policy. I mean, do you guys not trust yourselves that if times get tough that you'll be able to make the tough decisions? It just doesn't quite make sense to me why if the state requires 3, you would go above that. And I don't like seeing it brought back on us. Not too long ago when we got the letter from the county, when we made the resolution about the cuts that we were going to make, unfortunately we didn't have to make them. They were referencing our board policy, stating that I had a 9% reserve, and I don't like outside folks coming down on us and basically saying, oh, this is what you put in your policy when it's not even required. So I don't know why. I'm hearing some of the rationale on why having a reserve be there, but I don't know why it needs to be in policy. And if anybody would like to maybe try to answer that for me, I'd appreciate it.
One thing with policy is similar to the we have elections every 2 years for state legislators as well as board members, and so by having a policy that provides rationale on why things are in place, it doesn't constrict the current legislature body or the current board to, it doesn't constrict them from being able to change it, but it at least provides a base of why it's there to begin with.
Right, but I'm advocating, I was the one who asked for this to be put on the agenda, and I'm advocating now that I'm a board member for this to be taken out of policy. I don't think it's necessary. And, you know, to me, it just seems like a way for us to not make the tough decisions and stop deficit spending. We've been doing it for quite a while now, and to me, it just seems like it's an excuse so we can have this fat fund on the side, and then when actually, we're not even in a really downfall right now as far as money coming in, but we're still overspending. So to me, it's like, oh, well, let's just have this reserve over here so we can continue to overspend and avoid making the tough decisions that I think this body should have been doing for the last X amount of years. And it's just been kicked on down the road, and it just keeps going along, and eventually we need to get spending in line. So I am advocating that we definitely get this out of policy. I mean, we can have a reserve as high as we want. It just doesn't have to be in policy, in my opinion.
Charlie and then Ross.
Yeah, I guess I wanted to clarify what we actually mean by the word policy. I mean, I know we have board policy with a capital B, capital P, board policy 721, whatever, you know, those are policy that's codified in some way. But I don't think we're talking about that right now. I don't think this is not a board policy in the sense of a formal adopted, you know, board policy 501.2 or whatever it might be. It's
a board decision.
It's a board decision, or you know, I'm struggling for another word because I think the word policy is confusing here. It's not a formal board policy. And so first, I guess I'm just asking that we confirm that.
It's not written in one of the board policies, but it was voted on by the board.
But there's all these triggers that come into effect if it dips below the 9%. So yeah, it might not officially be technically a board policy, but I've seen your chart many, many times over the last year about what needs to be done. So I guess technically it isn't board policy, but when you have stuff in line that you need to do, when it dips below the 9, I don't really see how it's any different.
Ross?
Well, that's a real question. What do we do if we look out and the next year budget is going to be below, or the budget delivered, soon would dip us below 9%? I don't see how this isn't effectively the same as policy, but I go back to ask you, Jacob. I mean, I actually, it's very confusing what you're saying, because I hear us saying, we have a 9% floor that we don't want to drop through, so we're going to have to make cuts necessarily before we spend down more than 9% of the reserve. If we removed any limit on the reserve that we could drop down to 4 or whatever, there's no incentive necessarily to cut now, because we can sort of do it later. To me, that bright line of let's not let the reserve drop below X is a strong indication that we will be pulling our budget out of that nosedive. We will be shallowing or flattening out our deficit spending. We will necessarily not be in deficit spending when that reserve hits 9. But I'd love to hear actually what would happen if the administration brings to us a budget that will put our reserve below 9%. It comes to the board and we say what? We can't sign this, or we take this and despite our previous promises not to go below 9%, we're gonna sign it, or what do we do? How does this work?
Charlie?
I could answer that. We approved a budget that had us dropping below a 9% reserve, and we did that last June. So, what it does.
We're not even following what we've said we were going to do. So
Well,
why even have?
We are following what we said we were going to do, because what we said we were going to do was when we projected we were going below 9%, we would start the discussions of how to balance the budget.
Yes.
That's what we did when we hit that trigger.
And a projected future reserve below 9% is not the question. It's the day we go below a 9% reserve in the current year. Is that something that's unavoidable because we've adopted a 9% reserve as a policy?
No.
Yeah.
Charlie?
So first, I just wanted to agree with Jacob on the need to get the deficit spending under control. I think you've identified the most important thing to do, and so I just wanted to agree with that. I think that is important. And I think we've just identified what the 9% reserve is. It's merely the point where we start to have a conversation about how do we get a handle on the deficit spending. That's what it is.
That's what it is. Thank you. Miriam, did you want to speak?
So, there's like a bunch of phrases you could use, like actions speak louder than words. You can't speak out of both sides of your mouth. You can't have your cake and eat it too. You can write a policy and you can say you want to have a 9% reserve, and you can say you're going to have time to make thoughtful decisions, and you can say that you're going to begin a discussion, and all of that doesn't really work if you're saying that at one point and then not doing it at another. And so I think that Charlie is absolutely right. It essentially means absolutely nothing except a memo to self. And as a memo to self, it really isn't working for you. If passing a budget last year that put us in a 3-year position of going behind the 9% reserve was supposed to begin a process of making thoughtful decisions, then we wouldn't have given the superintendent a big raise. We wouldn't have chosen this year to adjust the benefits for the administrators. We would have chosen this year to reduce the number of curriculum staff when we had an opportunity. We would have chosen this year to actually discuss the budget proposals that were gathered from the community and attach numbers to them. We would have chosen this year to begin making, in every budget level and in every decision that was financial, we would have tried to make every possible restraint. But in fact, this board didn't do that. So you can make a memo to the community that says that you intend to have a 9% reserve because you want to be super cautious and careful, and you want to make sure that we never have a little bump in the road, and then just go ahead and make a big bump in the road. Because if those cuts that were possible to be made, and those decisions that could have been avoided aren't going to be made, then we are barreling like a train into next year when we will have very few options other than to make curriculum cuts. If you were serious about a 9% reserve, we would be in a position to talk about which positions should get riffed on February the 15th, and you're not doing that, and so you are not passing a budget that is going to be any better than last year's budget in terms of how it's stopping that barreling train. You've done absolutely nothing this year to stop that barreling train, really. I mean, to talk about a $600,000 here and $600,000 there, to talk about savings of $200,000 that's going to come from unspecified attrition. This is not a board that is having a serious and thoughtful discussion with the community about where we're going. So you can approve this, you cannot approve this. It's just a memo, and it's not meaning anything, and we're watching what you're doing, not what you're saying. And what we want you to do is to begin to make cuts now that don't affect the classroom, and to begin to do that and act serious about it. And we want you to start discussing, when we have to get to the classroom, how that's going to be prioritized.
You know, I am very serious about this process, and I think we have done a heck of a lot this year, and I don't appreciate all of our efforts and all of our thought to be discounted so handily over and over again. We have worked on a process that Jacob and I weren't even here on the board when it was voted on, and we have worked that process. We have asked for input. We have cut at the district office. We have cut a number of positions. That $600,000 worth of savings is real, and I want to put that in front of the community. We have saved over $600,000 in that budget. We are working hard on trying to do the right thing here, and we deserve a little bit of credit for the effort that we continuously make to keep our ears open, to listen to all of the input, and yet continue to make progress.
I don't know what you mean.
Yes, I do know what I mean. I have been a part of this. I have seen every step of this process play out. And the first thing that we need to do, as Jacob said, as Charlie said, as Paul said, is we have to stop deficit spending. We have a plan so that we can get through the next year, and we're going to begin to work on resolving that deficit spending. And when we're out of that deficit spending, we're going to end up with some sort of a reserve. Okay? We know what we're doing up here, and we are working hard on it, and we are not ignoring our job. We are very responsibly doing our job. And I want to say that because I know that's what I am doing. Thank you.
Thank you, Kim. Olga?
Well, I appreciate your impassioned speech, but as a parent that's been in the audience for the last several months since the school year started, I can tell you that I was really offended and really upset with every single board member that approved a raise for the superintendent while you guys were asking us to consider cuts across the board. And the problem is that I've sat here and the issue of reduction still continues. You don't sign up to be a school board member and have thin skin when people are calling you out on the work that needs to get done, and that's also not being done. That's our job as voters, as parents whose children will be affected. And this is our opportunity to be able to come to you on a monthly basis and say, we need you guys to do your job and hold up to what it is you signed up for. With the reductions, we're still continuing to hire administrative staff and offer raises when you're telling us that there's no money. There hasn't been any hiring freezes that have been offered on behalf of the district to the parents or the community or other staff within the district. We have an administrative director in special ed that when that position didn't exist before up until now, nor does it help our kids, nor does that position help our kids when teachers in special ed are having emergencies in the classroom or there's a shortfall of paras in the classroom that our children don't have enough assistance. A replacement for Mr. Parenti was immediately made instead of holding off on hiring someone immediately, even if it was at a first or second level, that should have been held off. And that was not even considered, but yet this was still being pushed down our throats. I take offense to only teachers' salaries and health benefits being mentioned as huge expenses, but not the cost of the district's salaries at the administrative level. We've been discussing this issue since last year, and there's still no clear proposal from the district, whether it's the entire school district, you all as school board members. I've only heard one board member continuously hold everyone accountable and shed to light what the real issues are. There is no plan. And I would be much more respectful of this entire body, besides that one school board member who has not changed, that you say we don't know exactly what path we're going to take. Before the winter break, there was a discussion at Cornell about holding off until January to see what the state was going to be giving us, possibly into February. And yet, you've gotten so much input from the community, from students, and there is no real plan. And all you're doing is scaring the shit out of our families about how and what will be implemented. How will this translate in the classrooms? And that's why I'm here. That's why I'll sit there for several hours on end every damn month to see what now. A memo to self is very different from this is what the plan is. And that's what I was expecting to hear this month, to be very frank with you, because this is not a new topic. This is not a new topic, and you shouldn't treat it as such. Do not play with our children. Thank you.
I want to point out that in the county, our superintendent is one of the lowest paid superintendents in the county. I would think that she ranks about 20th out of 26th. I also want to point out that a hiring freeze at the district office would have made it impossible for us to hire positions in at lower levels and at different position titles than what we were able to do. So by not putting a hiring freeze, we've been able to decrease the level of those positions and save money. So it wasn't a non-response, it was a thoughtful and prudent and saving response.
Okay. Anything else?
Yeah, I had something to ask about. I don't remember when it was, but it was the last board meeting or the meeting before that where I asked to possibly have agendized the topic of a hiring freeze, and I was wondering if that's going to be upcoming anytime soon.
That was a suggestion that was made by Member Clark, I believe 2 board meetings ago, and I don't know, we may have to look at the minutes if the board agreed to put it on the
Was there a
the
second?
agenda
I actually
committee.
seconded that.
Okay.
Sorry?
I did second that.
Okay, so we'll talk this Friday. We'll see when we can put it on the agenda.
And then just one last thing. I don't want to keep going over it too much, but I'm kind of agreeing with some of the people in the audience who spoke. I'm not quite sure we do have a clear direction on what we're going to do, except for just pushing it down the road for one more year. I was happy that we didn't have to make the cuts, but eventually we're going to have to make that. We solicited input from the community. They gave us ideas, and then nothing happened. So I want to make sure that when we do have to make these decisions, that the information that we already gathered is still used as far as new information, but it's pretty obvious this was going to be happening for years, and I'm just wondering when are we actually going to finally stop deficit spending? I mean, and it's just amazing to me. It's been going on for years and years and years, and to act like people weren't aware that it was going to happen, I don't know what else to say.
Ross?
And it's a rather
Excuse me, Ross. If we're going to continue the discussion, we need to vote to extend the meeting. Do we want to extend the meeting?
Well, we've got an agenda item after this. If it's only, well, just the closing
Right.
issues introduced by et cetera. So sure, we should give ourselves some minutes.
Okay, so
Till 9:45.
Is that okay? Sure. All right.
Just noted that the two somewhat independent issues of whether or not we maintain a reserve and whether or not we make cuts or come up with a non-deficit spending budget, to my mind, having a 9% reserve sort of forces the latter to the forefront. We have to stop deficit spending more sooner than later. But that's not actually what we're talking about now. We're talking about whether or not to maintain reserve, not should we get more serious about cuts. I do want to comment on the business of cuts and distance from the classroom. You know, you can have an army and it's nothing but privates in the trenches and there are no generals, there are no colonels, there are no lieutenants. That army isn't going to fight very well. There's infrastructure and there's necessary infrastructure. We can absolutely argue whether or not we need X number of assistant principals or how large the district office staff is, but there's going to be a principal at every school, or there's going to be that function spent on every school. And as a board, I'm absolutely willing to hear arguments as to how much we're spending versus how much we should. But I'd also note that the state has levied requirements on us. You know, that LCAP doesn't write itself. It may not take a whole Peter Parenti to do it, but when Peter stepped out, someone had to pick up that load. So give me your thoughts on all these issues, but recognize that we can't just cut everything that isn't in the classroom and expect that the classrooms will work.
Sure, come on.
Hi, just a quick question. I'm not sure if these are like the same areas that tend to overlap, but could the school be open to doing more self-funding? That speaking, last year I was commissioner of fundraising on leadership, and we had to get a lot of approval to do certain things from the district, and a lot of them, all of them, were pretty much shut down for, in a lot of students' opinions, not very good reasons, and saying like if we could do more self-funding, like how like some of them, like the elementary schools would do like walkathons, or we did like a carnival. Point is, if we did self-funding for certain school aspects, and then we were able to split them amongst like sports or arts, or what needed more money, would that be an option, being more lax on rules for self-funding?
Well, we do have fundraising groups who are working very hard to raise money for the schools, and as Kim mentioned at the beginning of the meeting, I think we have donations of $600,000 from school care.
No, less than that. It was 270.
$275,000 from school care. The only way we can raise amounts of money that would really compare to the budget deficit would be to pass a parcel tax. And I hope that's something that we'll be working on.
Okay.
Thanks for the thought.
I just wanted to make a distinction between making cuts at the district office level as opposed to making cuts at the school sites administration. When we're asking to make cuts at the district office, what we're looking at is what the district office staffing looked like 5 or 6 years ago compared to what it looks like now. And what we looked at and what we saw was that from 2012 to today, there is another high-level position, District 3 position, that was hired after 2012 that did not exist before. There was, I forgot what her name was. The woman who was doing the job, she retired last year. Marsha Brown was so busy, the rationale was she was so busy that they needed to create another equal position for someone to do her job, where in the past it was one person that was doing the job. The district hasn't increased in size that much from that time to now. The other thing is that there were many promotions that we saw at the district level, where we saw people being promoted to District 3 level administrators, which means higher salary as well. We also saw some support staff additions, and from what we saw, maybe 5 to 7 more support positions being added at the district office. So when we're talking about spending, district office spending, I'm not talking about expecting us to have a high school without a principal, expecting us to have a high school without assistant principals who do a very important job there. They do work very close to the students. What we're talking about is cuts at the district office, and we're asking for that because we've seen such an increase in spending and an increase in personnel. We've seen promotions of people at the district office from 2000, starting in about 2000, what we saw from about 2012. And I just want to make that clear. Thank you.
Thanks. Okay. We're actually getting a little bit off topic since we're supposed to be talking about the reserve. So I think if it's okay, unless somebody has something urgent, I think we're going to, okay, real quick, and then we're going to have to tie it up.
My name is Tobias Bodine, teacher at Cornell School, trying to put students first. When I first came to this district, I received a pink slip, a reduction in force announcement 3 times, and I want to know what the relationship between this budget reserve and the reduction in force that is going to happen or may happen in several weeks. Is there a connection? Is there no connection? Is there not going to be a reduction in force? Is there going to be a reduction in force?
I think you're talking about the notices that go out every spring.
Yeah, spring notices for temporary, non-tenured.
I think there's no relationship, but you can.
Yes, okay, I think I can answer the question. When we spoke at the last board meeting, that we believe that, and I'm hoping if the governor comes through with what he is saying, that we will not be providing any reduction in force notices to certificated staff in February. I'll just say in February for the 2018-19 school year.
Okay, so there's no connection to the 9%.
The reserve, I don't think it's actually connected to the reserve.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. So I think that brings us to the agenda items, matters introduced by the board.
Yes, so we have one, and that is for the agenda committee for the hiring freeze.
Okay. Ross?
And I would say, as input to me as a member of the agenda committee, I would love to hear from you, Jacob, offline, email, whatnot, how you think that discussion ought to go. It shouldn't be us meeting for 2 minutes and saying, should we have a hiring freeze, yay or nay? How many minutes do you think it needs? What sort of issues ought to be rolled into that? So we can give it the 5 minutes, the 50 minutes, the somewhere in between that it really will need. And we've had some discussions that have been pigeonholed into far too small a block, but we don't want to put too much time into something given all the other concerns.
So you want me to send you an email in the next few days?
Absolutely. Yeah,
All right.
not now.
Right,
but
right.
as
Thank you.
needed. Thanks.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. The meeting is adjourned.